There's something about stepping into the wilderness alone that sharpens your senses. Everything becomes heightened, every scent and sound more vivid, every shaft of light splitting through the canopy a beacon amid the shadowed undergrowth. I'd been hiking for years, the kind of person who found solace and clarity beneath the trees, far away from the frantic pulse of city life. So it felt natural, almost necessary, when I decided to take a solo trip into Northbridge Forest, a dense, ancient woodland known for its towering pines and tangled undergrowth, its serene beauty almost untouched by civilization. I packed lightly but wisely for the week. Water, hearty snacks, a map, compass, first aid kit, and my trusted flashlight. The weather was clear with just a hint of crispness in the air that suggested early autumn. I drove to the forest edge the afternoon before, parking at a small lot where a faded wooden sign welcomed visitors, warning them to respect nature and remain on trails. The sign also bore an additional, unofficial warning many locals whispered, but never officially acknowledged, a reminder that the forest held mysteries best left alone. The first morning, I woke before dawn, excitement mingling with a calm anticipation. The early light filtered softly through leaves still kissed with morning dew. I slung my pack over my shoulders and took the trailhead, the path coated with fallen needles that muffled my steps. The scent of pine and wet earth was intoxicating in its purity, and the gentle rustle of the breeze against leaves became a quiet symphony. In those initial hours, the forest seemed alive in every gentle movement. Flocks of small birds flitted from branch to branch. Squirrels darted up trees with practiced agility, and the sunlight wove mosaics through the high canopy. I felt a peaceful rhythm settle into my stride, the familiar cadence of hiking alone, the comforting solitude punctuated only by natural sounds. As the day elaborated, I moved deeper into the woods, leaving behind the last signs of human presence. Terrain shifted, from wide, well-trod trails to narrow, winding paths, barely visible under layers of leaves and fallen branches. The density of the trees increased until sunlight became a rare visitor, the world turning dim and reverent. It was during one of these deeper excursions, around mid-afternoon, that I first became aware of something off. A faint sound at first, easily mistaken for wind or the plaintive call of distant wildlife. But beneath the natural chorus, a subtle thread of fragility wove itself in, a sound unmistakably human. I paused, listening intently. Yes, through the dappled shadows, I heard it clearly now, the soft, plaintive crying of a child. My heart caught in a cold grip. I scanned the surroundings, expecting to see a family or child out of sight on the path, but there was nobody, only endless trees silhouetted against the sky. I called out softly, a cautious, "Hello?" The only response was the rustle of leaves and a faint echo of sobbing, delicate, sorrowful, and achingly distant. The sound seemed to ebb and flow, never intensifying, never fully disappearing. Compelled but cautious, I stepped forward, attempting to trace the cries. The forest grew thick around me. Each step was careful, a soft shuffle over moss and underbrush, eyes constantly searching. Yet no matter how far I walked, the crying remained just out of reach, an elusive thread guiding me deeper into the woods, but leading nowhere I could find. As twilight began to creep between the branches, the cries faded into silence. The forest reacquired its heavy stillness, the weight of solitude around me deepening. I found a small clearing to set up camp for the night, the soft glow of my lantern casting long shadows that flickered with the dancing breeze. The fading sounds of the woods at dusk normally comforted me, but now something lingered, a subtle tension that hummed beneath the stillness. My thoughts raced between memories of the crying and whispered warnings I had heard from locals about the forest, protecting secrets too disturbing to face. Exhausted, I lay down on the cot I had brought, eyelids heavy, but a part of my mind unwilling to release the day's eerie events. The cries had come from nowhere and everywhere. No child was found. Something in those woods was watching, waiting, calling, and I was alone. The chill of the first night in the forest clung to me long after I'd extinguished my lantern and nestled into my sleeping bag. Despite the comfort of the campfire's fading embers and the serenity of the trees' rustling lullaby, sleep was elusive. My mind kept returning to the faint, haunting sound of a child's crying, a plaintive, sorrowful thread woven into the fabric of the woods. Morning brought a deceptive calm. The early light cut through the dense canopy, casting ethereal beams across the mossy forest floor. I rose quietly, the rustle of leaves and distant birdsong filling the cool air. Determined to uncover the source of the cries, I packed light, refreshed, and recalibrated my compass before stepping back onto the winding, leaf-strewn trail. The forest, bathed in soft sunlight and morning mist, wore its familiar cloak of ancient calm. Yet beneath that peaceful facade, the memory of the crying unsettled me. Every step I took through the undergrowth felt weighted with anticipation. I listened intently to the symphony of nature, searching for that elusive sound. Hours passed before the familiar whimper floated through the trees again. Low, broken sobs carried on the wind, distant yet achingly close. This time, it seemed to beckon, guiding me deeper into uncharted realms of the forest I hadn't explored before. The path narrowed, becoming a tangled weave of roots, fallen branches, and shadow. I called out, voice low but steady. "Hello? Are you all right?" The crying paused. Silence fell. And then, just as I hesitated to move, a faint giggle, fragile, almost too delicate to be real, echoed off the trees. I spun toward the sound, heart pounding, yet the clearing that greeted me held no solace, no child, no figure, only shafts of sunlight filtering through swaying leaves. A cold shiver traced my spine. The forest had swallowed the child's voice, hiding its secret within the shadows. No footprints marred the damp earth. No recent signs of disturbance betrayed any human passage. It was as if the cries belonged to no one and everyone, echoing through the hushed, ancient woods. Unease quickened its rhythm in my chest. I pressed further, following the disturbance as it twisted and faded through glades and under stories of ferns and thistles. The forest's voice, once inviting, now snarled with hints of warning. Branches clawed, roots snaked across my path, and the air clotted with an indefinable heaviness. By midday, the sun's warmth drifted through the canopy, yet I found no relief. The cries grew sporadic, sometimes merging with the wind or distant bird calls, challenging my ability to distinguish the real from the imagined. A dense patch of brambles forced me to reroute, leading me onto a barely discernible path littered with brittle leaves. As I pushed through, a sudden movement caught the corner of my eye, a flicker of white among the dark trunks. I froze. Moments later, the faintest silhouette appeared. A small figure, fleeting between trees, but gone before I could focus. My breath caught in my throat. "A child," I whispered to the emptiness. I moved cautiously, straining my eyes against the trailing shadows, but the forest only held silence. The haunting presence felt both near and distant, as if the child's spirit was tethered to this place by invisible threads, caught between worlds, desperate for help it could never receive. To break the mounting isolation, I shared my experience with a small group of hikers I met at a ranger station the following afternoon. Their faces turned pale as I described the cries. "You're not the first to hear that," one ranger said quietly. "They say the forest holds the sorrow of a lost child, one who vanished decades ago. The locals call her the Whispering Girl." The name sent a chill down my spine. Stories layered upon stories. Tales of mourning parents, tragic accidents, and restless spirits unfolded in the dim light of the ranger's kiosk. I listened closely, the pieces fitting eerily, with what I'd experienced. That night, back at my camp, every crackling twig and whistling wind felt like a voice calling out in sorrow. I kept the fire burning high and listened. The crying returned intermittently, a fragile thread weaving through the night's fabric. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of white-clad children wandering endless forests, their faces blurred, their cries fading echoes. When dawn broke soft and pale, I felt a mixture of dread and determination. I was drawn deeper into the mystery of the forest and its sorrowful child, a journey that promised no easy answers. I packed my gear and set off once more, the path before me covered in lengthening shadows. The crying was no longer just a sound, but a presence, one I could neither grasp nor escape. Into the heart of the forest, I walked on. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more the world around me seemed to shift, not just physically, but on a plane less tangible, as if the very atmosphere vibrated with unseen energies. The sun, despite its morning ascent, struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, filtering through in muted shafts and casting long, quivering shadows that danced uncomfortably at the edge of my vision. What once was a familiar path now felt alien, each step leading me farther from reality as I had known it. The child's cries had faded with dawn, leaving only an oppressive silence, a silence heavy with unspoken things. I pressed onward, every sense heightened, every noise amplified in the stillness. The forest no longer felt like a sanctuary. It had become a maze of secrets and stories that tangled my mind with threads I could neither unravel nor ignore. Between the skeletal trunks and moss-covered boulders, I noticed movement, shadows shifting just beyond focus. Sometimes a fleeting silhouette slipped between the trees, too swift and indistinct to identify, but enough to quicken my heart. The forest whispered in voices not entirely human, whispers threading through the rustling leaves and riding on the chill breeze. I stopped to listen. At first, it was mere murmurs, like the distant hum of insects or the wind weaving through branches. But gradually, the whispers morphed into fragments of speech, words spoken in a language foreign to my ears, their cadence haunting and melodious, filled with a sorrow I could feel deep within my bones. The words were indiscernible, their meaning lost to me, yet their presence undeniable. I tried to respond aloud, my voice barely a breath among the rustling leaves. "Who's there? What do you want?" The forest answered not with words, but with a sudden, sharp breeze that rustled the trees and carried a faint, sorrowful sigh. My skin crawled, cold despite the afternoon warmth. I remembered the stories I had heard from the ranger, that the forest was cursed not just by loss, but by a lingering grief bound to the land itself. Locals spoke of a child who had vanished without a trace decades ago, her spirit said to wander the woods eternally, crying for home, for solace, for something lost. I was beginning to understand that the child wasn't alone. This forest was a nexus of forgotten memories and restless souls, whispers tangled in the branches, shadows shaped by mourning and regret. Hours passed in uneven silence and eerie murmurs. The trail beneath my feet became less defined with every step. Small trees and thorny bushes sprouted where none had been before, and the path forked and winded in directions I didn't recognize. I pulled out my compass. The needle quivered as if frightened, wavering uncertainly. Disoriented, I realized I might be straying from any real trail, the forest bending around me like a living labyrinth. I tried to retrace my steps, but the terrain had changed. The familiar signs, the broken branches, the mossy stones, were gone or rearranged. The trees stood taller, more silent, their leaves dripping with an otherworldly dew that glittered faintly even under the dull light. A creeping sensation gnawed at my mind, whispering that I was no longer just a visitor here, that the forest was shaping itself around me, drawing me in, binding me to its hidden heart. As the afternoon sun began its descent, the whispers grew more insistent, rising and falling in a cadence that matched my quickening pulse. I heard my name spoken softly, a voice like the echo of a child's laughter intertwined with a sob. "Come, stay, don't leave." Instinct screamed to run, to flee back to open spaces and known paths. But something tethered me, a compulsion born from empathy or terror or both. Through the trees I spotted it again, a glimpse of white, the ghostly flutter of fabric among the dark trunks. The spectral figure of a child, fleeting yet unmistakable, stood at the edge of a clearing cloaked in shadows. I took a tentative step forward. Suddenly, the forest seemed to exhale, the whispers multiplying. Pleas, warnings, laments, rising together as if the land itself mourned for what had been lost. The child vanished like mist in sunlight, leaving behind an empty clearing filled with the scent of damp earth and faded memories. Kneeling, I noticed the ground disturbed. Small footprints pressed lightly into the soft soil, but no sign of where they might lead. I sat quietly, heart thundering, enveloped by the thick silence that returned. Time became fluid. Minutes stretched into hours as twilight draped the forest in cool, dark blues. The whispers faded to distant echoes. Stars flickered to life overhead, their cool glow a stark contrast to the warm sadness that clung to the earth. I realized then that the forest had become a liminal place, a threshold where past and present, life and death, mingled indistinguishably, and I was caught in its embrace. With the night drawing near, I carefully set up camp near the edge of the clearing. The fire I kindled sputtered against the damp air, casting flickering light, but unable to fully push back the darkness pressing at the edges of the wood. As I settled in, the whispers returned, quieter now, more resigned. Among them floated fragments of lullabies, soft and broken, drifting like ghosts through the night air. Despite the mounting fear, exhaustion claimed me at last. Sleep pulled me under, carrying dreams of sorrowful children wandering endless forests, their eyes hollow and aching. And beneath those dreams, the forest whispered, waiting, watching. The dawn broke hesitantly, its pale fingers stretching through the dense canopy, attempting to cast away the shadows that had ruled the forest overnight. But for me, the night's whispers still clung tightly to my skin, like a lingering chill that no amount of morning sunlight could entirely dispel. Sleep had been restless, invaded by fragmented dreams of childlike laughter and distant cries that seemed to follow me even as I awoke. I pushed myself from the makeshift campsite near the edge of the clearing, muscles aching and mind heavy. The forest, beautiful and towering by daylight, now felt vast and unknowable, a living entity that's both protector and captor. I was determined to find my way, to understand the cries that had drawn me deeper. But as the morning wore on, it became painfully clear. The forest was reshaping itself around me, erasing the familiar and rewriting the map beneath my feet. The trail I had confidently followed just hours ago had vanished. Where once I saw compacted earth and scattered leaves marking a path, there now stood a tangle of underbrush, as thick and unyielding as an ancient fortress wall. Every attempt to retrace my steps led me into blind alleys of twisted roots and thorny bushes. Panic nipped at my resolve, but I forced myself to breathe deeply, to stay calm. I relied on my compass, hoping the needle's steady point toward north would guide me home. But even that seemed to falter. The needle wavered uncertainly, spinning briefly before settling in ways that conflicted with the lay of the land around me. My sense of direction, once a trusted ally through countless hikes, betrayed me. Time itself seemed to twist. Hours felt like fleeting moments, moments stretched into endless stretches. The sun's height in the sky grew erratic, casting shadows that leaped unpredictably, confusing my internal clock. I began to sense the forest did not wish to be navigated, a sentient labyrinth, whispering secrets that I was neither welcome nor prepared to hear. As the shadows lengthened toward afternoon, my unease deepened. The cries of the child re-emerged intermittently, sometimes as distant sobs, other times as faint laughter carried on a shifting breeze, spinning around me like a spectral dance. I called out repeatedly, my voice hoarse from dry air and exertion. "Child, where are you? I want to help." Only the wind replied, teasing the leaves and mocking my desperation. That's when I spotted it, an old weathered tree, its bark scarred deeply, roots sprawling like grasping fingers into the earth. At its base lay fragments of something fragile, a broken doll, its porcelain face cracked, one glass eye staring blankly as if frozen in eternal sorrow. My heart clenched. There were no footprints nearby, no recent marks in the soil, yet the doll's presence was a stark message. It confirmed the child's story was real, lingering not just in sound, but in the refuse of forgotten memories. Suddenly, a shifting figure caught my eye between the trees, just beyond a veil of mist that hovered low to the ground. I blinked rapidly, and the figure vanished as if swallowed instantly by the forest. I stumbled forward, toward a clearing I hadn't noticed before. The air grew thick, the silence oppressive. The forest's usual chorus was absent here. Even birds had abandoned this place, leaving an eerie void of sound. At the clearing's center, a shallow depression revealed itself, circled by moss-covered stones and strewn with decaying leaves. An ancient campsite, long forgotten, remnants of charred wood, rusted canisters, and tattered fabric, whispering of lives lived and lost. I knelt, brushing away leaves to find a faded photograph sealed beneath a broken glass bottle, smudged faces of a family, smiles frozen in time beneath the weight of tragedy. Reluctantly, I gathered clues mingling with the damp earth, as if the forest itself wished to reveal its secrets. A solemn understanding began to take root. The cries were echoes of pain and loss, bound to the land like roots. The forest was not merely a witness, but a vessel carrying the grief of the child and those who had vanished alongside her. As twilight approached, the sky deepened into hues of bruised purple and inky blue. The child's cries swelled once more, a desperate call on the wind, as if encouraging me onward, or perhaps warning me away. I set up camp within the clearing, guarded by skeletal trees that stretched their limbs skyward like pleading hands. The night's chorus returned, whispers woven among the trees, subtle but everywhere. I caught fragments of song, a lullaby fractured by time and sorrow. Despite exhaustion, sleep remained hesitant, visited by dreams where the child appeared, silent and pale, reaching out through shadows. Before drifting fully, I whispered a silent promise. "I will find you. I will hear your story." In those words, the forest seemed to pause, a fleeting moment of fragile connection between the living and the lost. The trail was gone, but the path forward was beginning to reveal itself, woven with shadows, whispers, and the aching heart of the forest. When night descended, it brought with it a profound sense of isolation, like plunging into a vast, endless ocean of darkness. The forest around me seemed to transform completely as shadows deepened, the familiar shapes of trees morphing into ghostly silhouettes that loomed eerily under a moonless sky. Every sound, from the soft crackling of leaves beneath my boots to the distant hoot of an owl, felt amplified, echoing through the dense blackness. Determined not to let fear overtake me, I pressed on, guided only by the faint red glow of my fading flashlight and the pale shimmer of fireflies weaving through the undergrowth like scattered stars. But it was then that I noticed something truly unnerving. Flickering lights, small, erratic, and impossibly bright, hovering deep within the forest's heart. At first, I thought they were reflections of distant campfires, or perhaps the lanterns of other hikers. But there were no other souls around, at least. None that my eyes could detect or my ears could hear. The flickers danced and shifted unpredictably, appearing here, then disappearing there, like will-o'-the-wisps teasing me into the unknown. An uneasy curiosity propelled me toward one cluster of lights, their cold glow casting distorted shapes on the tangle of trees. As I moved closer, the air thickened, growing heavier, as if saturated with unseen energy. The further I stepped in, the more the forest seemed to warp. Paths twisted and doubled back. Trees that should have been tall and straight leaned in unnatural angles, and the ground beneath me shifted subtly, as if breathing. My compass spun wildly, useless for navigation. The familiar world was dissolving, replaced by a surreal landscape that defied logic. I hesitated, heart pounding, but the flickering lights beckoned with an almost hypnotic pull. Each tiny orb seemed alive, pulsating with a rhythm that synced eerily with my own racing heartbeat. Suddenly, the lights scattered, fleeing from some unseen presence. I chased after them, desperate for answers, but the forest darkened around me, swallowing hope and revealing only the crumbling remnants of forgotten paths. Then came visions, shadows cast by those oscillating lights that hinted at fleeting shapes. A child's silhouette standing near a twisted tree, a pair of glowing eyes watching silently from a dense thicket, and ephemeral faces that flickered briefly before dissolving into mist. These surreal images unsettled me deeply, blurring the line between reality and hallucination. I stumbled forward, disoriented but tethered by the faint sound of distant crying weaving beneath the flickering lights. The child's sobs grew louder, simultaneously desperate and distant, echoing both through the forest and inside my mind. Suddenly, the air shifted again. The ground beneath me gave a subtle tremor, and I barely caught myself before falling. Ahead, the lights converged on a small clearing, revealing an old stone well barely visible in the thick undergrowth. Drawn irresistibly, I approached with caution. The well's rim was worn and cracked, covered with moss and curling vines. Its depths yawned into inky darkness, the source of a stale, cold draft that seemed to whisper secrets long buried. As I peered into the abyss, the flickering lights gathered above and then plunged silently into the darkness below, swallowed whole without a trace. My breath caught. The crying intensified, now unmistakably close, emanating from the well itself. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The forest around the well seemed to darken unpredictably, shadows pooling like spilled ink. Suddenly, a voice echoed softly from the well's depths, a distant, trembling whisper, speaking words I couldn't comprehend, but felt etched in sorrow and longing. Fear rooted me, but a primal need to understand forced me to lean closer. In that moment, a chill surged through my body, a cold so deep it felt as though ice had gripped my soul. The wind ceased, the fireflies disappeared, and the forest around me fell into a suffocating silence. I retreated from the well, stumbling into the dark woods, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere. As I fled, I realized the flickering lights were not simple phenomena, but manifestations, perhaps spirits trapped in the forest's web, tethered to places of sorrow and loss. Exhausted and shaken, I made my way back to camp, senses on edge, every shadow now suspicious, every rustle a possible threat. The night was long, haunted by flickers of light that danced just beyond my tent's faint glow, teasing me with glimpses of the spectral child and her sorrowful song. Sleep fled before dawn, replaced by a gnawing resolve. Deeper truth lay in the forest's darkest heart, guarded by flickering lights and whispers that bent reality itself. I resolved then to uncover it all, no matter the cost. The forest depths pulled me further into their embrace, a place where reality began to unravel, and the worldly rules I had always trusted faltered. Night had fallen once more, draping the woods in a velvet darkness that seemed alive, waiting. In the fading glow of my flashlight, I moved cautiously through the underbrush. The flickering lights I had seen days before had ceased, but a new presence stirred a feeling I could no longer deny was something palpable and close. Then, amid the tangle of trees and creeping moss, I saw her, the child, a pale, ethereal figure standing quietly just beyond the reach of my light. Her form flickered slightly, as though caught between this world and the next. Her hair was the soft shade of moonlight, cascading in silken waves, and she wore a simple white dress that billowed gently, despite the absence of wind. Her face, though blurred and indistinct, radiated a haunting vulnerability. She looked smaller than any child I had seen, almost fragile, as if the forest itself cradled her in sorrow. She did not cry this time, yet her silent presence communicated volumes, an invitation, a plea, a warning. I stepped forward slowly, breath hitching in my throat. "Are you the child I've been hearing?" She tilted her head, and for a moment, our eyes' deep pools of shadow met. In that fleeting gaze, I sensed a torrent of pain and longing, a story left unfinished. Tentatively, I followed as she began to move, gliding over roots and stones with unnatural grace. The forest path seemed to reform beneath her feet, clearing a winding trail that I desperately hoped would lead to answers. Through the labyrinth of trees, we journeyed deeper than I had yet dared venture. The air thickened with unspoken memories and heavy grief, the silence punctuated only by the softest steps and my ragged breathing. We arrived at a forgotten clearing, encircled by ancient oaks towering skyward. At its center lay the remnants of a small campsite, long abandoned and overtaken by nature's reclaiming hands. In the middle, a rusted lantern half buried in leaves, cracked pottery, and a photo frame cracked and blackened by time. The spectral child halted beside the burnt-out fire pit. Her form shimmered, and in the flickering light of the lantern's ghostly glow, I saw the faint outlines of symbols etched along a stone slab nestled nearby. Symbols echoing those that had appeared in my dreams and the ancient book I'd glimpsed in the ranger's cabin. A sudden chill wrapped around me. The child knelt, reaching out toward the fire pit. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper carried on the wind. This is where it happened, where the tears began. I studied the clearing with growing dread. Stories I had only heard in fragments now took flesh. A family lost to sorrow, an accident or cruelty unknown, and a child whose spirit had become bound to the forest's heart. Determined, I crouched beside the pit, brushing away leaves and debris. Hidden within the ashes, I found a locket delicate and blackened, yet unmistakably crafted with care. Inside was a tiny portrait of a girl, her eyes hauntingly familiar. The spectral child's gaze lingered on the locket with profound sadness. Then, as if acknowledging my unspoken promise to uncover her story, she turned toward the trees and began to disappear slowly, her form fading like mist under the dawn sun. "Wait," I called, voice trembling. But she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of a soft sigh and the lingering scent of jasmine. Alone again, I sat in the clearing, the weight of the revelation pressing heavy on my chest. The child's cries, the shadows, the flickering lights, they were all threads entwined in a tapestry of grief and unfinished business. As night deepened, I understood the forest's cruel truth. It was a place caught between worlds, where sorrow waited in every corner, and some spirits were condemned to wander, lost and unheard. My role had shifted from observer to witness, from visitor to reluctant participant. The spectral child had opened a door, and now I must peer through it, whatever darkness awaited. The discovery of the abandoned clearing and the ghostly child's ethereal presence had altered everything. The forest was no longer just a backdrop for my solitary journey. It was an ancient vessel of grief and tragedy, a place where memories lingered like mist, refusing to dissipate with the passage of time. That evening, back at my camp under a sky thick with stars, I pored over the notes and scraps of information I'd gathered from the ranger's cabin and whispered stories shared by locals. The intersections between legend and reality grew clearer and more chilling. According to accounts pieced together from obscure folklore and forgotten records, this forest had long been associated with disappearances, most notably involving children. The most enduring legend spoke of a young girl named Alara, who vanished nearly 50 years ago. She was said to have been lured deep into the forest by mysterious lights, a child curious and innocent, never to return. Locals referred to her as the Whispering Girl, convinced her restless spirit haunted the woods, crying for her lost family and calling out to anyone willing to listen. According to some, Alara had been frightened and lost in these very woods, her presence lingering as both a warning and a plea. I learned of tales describing strange lights flickering through the trees, lights eerily similar to those I had witnessed, thought to be manifestations of Alara's spirit. They were said to mislead travelers, drawing them off the beaten path into the heart of the forest, where time and space folded upon themselves. It seemed the spectral child had been reaching out, attempting to bridge the rift between this world and hers, seeking someone to comprehend her fate and perhaps bring peace. These stories resonated painfully with my own experience. The crying, the flickering lights, the shadows that shifted just beyond sight. The forest was a liminal place, trapped in a loop of sorrow, an unfinished lament. But why? What had truly happened to Alara? Had she been a victim of accident, foul play, or something more sinister lurking in these woods? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden gust of wind that swept through the clearing, carrying whispers tangled in jargon and emotion, voices of the past weaving with those of the present. Determined to understand, I retraced my steps to the ancient stone with etched symbols in the clearing, running my hands over the carved runes that seemed to be protective seals or binding marks. The air around the stone rippled faintly, and as I concentrated, I perceived echoes of a ritual, a desperate act by those who had sought to cage a dark force bound to the child's disappearance. The forest itself bore the scars of this binding, the distorted paths, the erratic flickering lights, and most hauntingly, the cries that persisted. The more I unraveled, the more it became clear. Alara's spirit was caught in the crossfire of an ancient torment, and human trying to contain it. That night, the forest was restless. I sat by my fire, replaying the whispers and visions, piecing together the fragments of history. As midnight approached, the spectral child appeared once more, her form sorrowful and distant. This time, she gestured toward the far edge of the clearing, toward a cluster of gnarled trees rumored to conceal one of the forest's darkest secrets. Gathering my courage, I followed her silent lead. Through thick underbrush and tangled roots, we moved to a secluded glen where the earth was disturbed, a shallow grave marked by broken branches and muted flowers. The air hung heavy with the scent of earth and forgotten tears. Alara knelt on the ground, placing a spectral hand on the soil. Her voice, barely audible, carried the weight of decades-long sorrow. Here rests what was taken, what must be freed. I shuddered, realizing this was the final resting place of the tragedy, the site where Alara had vanished, where darkness had claimed innocence. It dawned on me then, to free the child and the forest, the truth of what had transpired must be acknowledged and honored. The next hours were spent offering silent prayers and tokens, a small bouquet of wildflowers, a whispered vow to remember, and a promise to seek justice beyond the forest's confines. As dawn light began to touch the treetops, Alara's form grew translucent, her expression softening into one of peace. With a final, wistful smile, she faded into the morning mists, leaving behind a silence that felt both heavy and healing. The forest seemed to breathe anew, the oppressive weight lifting slightly, its shadows retreating just enough to allow hope. But the echoes of the past remained, a reminder that some wounds run deep, that grief can bind souls long after life ends, and that sometimes courage means facing not only the ghosts in the woods, but the truths buried in our hearts. The first light of dawn filtered timidly through the dense canopy above, painting the forest floor with soft hues of gold and amber. Despite the promise of daybreak, a lingering weight pressed heavily upon me, a remnant of the night's harrowing confrontation with the forest's past and its restless spirit. I stood alone in the clearing where the spectral child had led me, the morning air crisp and still. The shadows that had haunted me for days seemed to recede now, but their absence didn't bring peace, only a quiet unease, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. The village nearby was a distant memory, a place I longed for but felt tethered to by invisible threads woven from grief and mystery. The whispers of the wind carried the cries of the lost, weaving together past and present in a mournful melody I couldn't yet escape. Flames from my small fire crackled softly, the smoke rising thin and pale into the awakening sky. I had packed lightly, choosing survival over comfort, and yet here, in the heart of the forest, even simplicity felt complicated and fragile. I recalled the spectral child's final apparition, her smile tinged with sorrow and hope, a silent thank you for acknowledging her story, for bearing witness to the darkness that had claimed her. But there was one truth I had come to understand deeply. Some spirits don't find rest. They linger, echoing through the trees, their cries woven into the fabric of the forest for eternity. As I gathered my belongings, the memories of my journey crystallized into resolve. This was no mere escape, but an act of remembrance, a promise to carry the story beyond this place. The path ahead was uncertain and treacherous, but I stepped forward with careful determination. The forest, once a maze of confusion and dread, slowly yielded under my steady tread. The trees' resilient sentinels stood silent witnesses as I retraced the twisted roots and broken trails, guided by the fading light and my unwavering will. Occasionally, I paused, sensing fleeting glimmers, a whisper of movement beneath leaves, the softest rustle suggesting the child's presence was never fully gone. Those echoes stirred a deep empathy inside me, mingling with the primal urge to escape and the burden of the knowledge I now carried. The journey back was arduous. The familiar markers I once relied on remained unreliable. The forest tested my resolve with sudden drops, hidden roots, and the shifting terrain that seemed to reshape itself in the grip of ancient grief. But I navigated by memory, intuition, and a heart tuned to the forest's silent songs. Hours passed before I glimpsed the fading outlines of the parking lot where my car waited, a beacon of reality and freedom. I paused, breath deep and steady, the spectral child's story etched indelibly within me. Stepping into the clearing, I looked back one last time. The forest stretched endless and inscrutable, its mysteries hidden among shadows and whispers. I could almost hear the faintest cry carried on the breeze, a lament and a lullaby intertwined, a call that perhaps would never end. As I drove away, the trees receded into the distance, their silhouettes softened by daylight and distance, yet the forest echo remained. Within the quiet spaces of the world beyond, I knew that some stories are not confined to pages or memories. They live on in the wind, the rustling leaves, and the hearts that listen. And sometimes the forest calls back.